We in the West, and I'm including Australasia here, have the idea that there is a difference between church and state. There is no such difference in the Muslim world. And that goes a long way to explain why a Hamas journalist feels quite empowered to be a Hamas soldier as well, without mentioning it to the Western news media to whom he is sending his stories. I'm Granniopteryx. What sparked my interest in this discussion about the difference between religious and secular was the news that a group called Honest Reporting had discovered, because they had been trawling through the internet, that there was a so-called journalist who is employed by various news sources in America and Britain, like AP and Reuters and those sorts of things. And he was apparently part of the Hamas invasion of Israel on October the 7th. And they found the evidence for this in the photographs they took. And I'm interrupting myself to ask you to click like and to subscribe to my channel. If you're on YouTube, click the bell button so you'll get notifications. Share the video. All the links to my other platforms are in the description, along with links to donation sites. I'm grateful for donations, but the best thing you can do for this video and my channel is to click like and to subscribe. Okay, back to journalism. This is one person, but apparently there are a couple of others. A guy called Hassan Eslaya, and he is not wearing any identification that he is in the press. Here we have him being given the kiss of honor from Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza, or at least the only one who's actually in Gaza, and props to him, I think. So far as we know, so far as I know, but what do I know? So far as I know, he is down there in the tunnels with his men, while the rest of the Hamas executive are living in air-conditioned luxury in Qatar. I don't think that's going to save you guys. Sooner or later, those Israelis are going to get you, I think. But that's beside the point. This guy is obviously big buddies with Sinwar. And here he is out in the battlefield, again, not wearing any sort of identification to show he's in the press. And there was one photo I saw, which I can't find now, so I'm sorry. And if you wish to discard this information, he's holding a grenade, so he's obviously part of the fighting force. Now, the Israelis are saying that he knew about this attack and should have told the Israelis or the Americans or whatever about it. Well, actually, I disagree with that. If he'd have done that, that would have been certain death for him. And secondly, I'm not sure how much he knew of what they were going to do once they got into Israel. In fact, I'm not sure even their commanders knew what they were going to do or how things would turn out. I mean, the story is that they were supposed to just grab some hostages and run back. Well, they could have got all the hostages they want from the peace camp. Instead, they killed everybody. Oh, well, that was the most merciful thing they did in the peace camp. And then they went on to attack other villages. So I don't know how much of that was entirely within Hamas's control. So, it's difficult to know that. But certainly, what would the Israelis... I mean, if he went to the Israelis and told them, look, they're planning a murderous attack of rape and carnage and baby burning and whatever, would they believe him? And the Israelis had their eyes well off the ball anyway. So I think if he'd have stood on the on the fence with a megaphone and shouted through the megaphone, there probably wouldn't have been much he could have done. I mean, I'm not saying that makes him a good person. I'm just saying that I'm not too sure that he could have warned anyone. But what I am sure of is that he is thoroughly on the Hamas side, putting forward the Hamas story and well embedded with the Hamas top command. And the shame is not that this guy doesn't understand the difference between a journalist and a soldier, which is something we in the West do know about and assume everyone else does, and that's not the case. That's not his shame. The shame is that organisations like AP and Reuters and the New York Post, the New York Times, or whoever were reporting this, they were taking him at his word, and for other things too. And obviously he's going to give a wrong impression of the way the Israelis behave. Now, I just want you to know about Honest Reporting, because it's a very interesting organisation. It was started by some Jewish students in Golders Green, and they were just finding instances of press bias. And this was what started it all. It shows an Israeli soldier who appears to have just bloodied the head of what was said to be a Palestinian on Temple Mount. And this is the sort of story that got circulated. Now, we can look at this a little more carefully. You see, here's the picture. So what happened was this. Dr. Aaron Grossman of Chicago sent the following letter to the Times, the New York Times. Okay, regarding your picture on page A5 of the Israeli soldier and the Palestinian on Temple Mount. That Palestinian is actually my son, Tuvia Grossman, a Jewish student from Chicago. He and two of his friends were pulled from their taxi cab while travelling in Jerusalem by a mob of Palestinian Arabs and were severely beaten and stabbed. That picture could not have been taken on the Temple Mount because there are no gas stations on the Temple Mount. Yeah, I mean, you can see it there, even in this little black and white photo. And, that should have been a big clue when that story was sent to the New York Times, obviously by someone very partial. Somebody should have looked at that and said, "Oi, I don't recall any petrol stations on that particular part of land." Anyway, and certainly none with Hebrew lettering, like the one clearly seen behind the Israeli soldier attempting to protect my son from the mob. So this Israeli soldier, it turns out, was an Arab in the Israeli police force. And he was protecting these American students from a mob of bloodlusting Palestinians. And yet this was the story that the New York Times published. In response, after they got this letter, the news outlet published a half-hearted correction that identified Tuvia Grossman as an American student in Israel. They still couldn't say it out loud, not as a Jew who was beaten by Arabs. The correction also noted that Mr. Grossman was wounded in Jerusalem's Old City, although the assault actually occurred in the Arab neighbourhood of Wadi al-Juz. After additional public outrage, the New York Times reprinted Tuvia Grossman's picture, this time with the proper caption, along with a full article detailing his near lynching at the hands of Palestinians. So that's the sort of thing the New York Times does, because it gets its stories from people like this guy, Eslaya. All right, now this is very dangerous from the point of view of any journalist trying to work in a war zone. Journalists from the West, where press jackets and usually protective hats as well with press on them, so they are not targets. That's the idea. And they're not targets because they are impartial observers of a situation. Now, that doesn't stop some of them from getting shot, sometimes by accident, sometimes by design. But that's our idea. We have a separation of church and state, of press and people. That's supposed to be the way things go, because we have this idea that there is a spiritual dimension to our lives, and that's separate from the secular dimension. That's where it started. It took the Christian world a long time to get to that stage of sophistication. The Muslim world hasn't got there yet. So in the Muslim world, religious law is civil law. Now, as has been noted, countries that were under colonial rule got either French colonial or British colonial laws, which were civil laws and applied separately from the religious laws. Bit by bit, as the colonies have gone back to their countries, as the colonials have gone back, these countries have started slipping more and more into this fusion of civil and religious. But there are some countries like Turkey, for instance, or even Egypt, who have a more, well, we would call it a more sophisticated look. But generally speaking, inside the Muslim mind is the idea that there is no difference between religious and secular. There is no secular. It's all religious. So if you want to send lying photographs to AP News, well, that's not lying. That is furthering the interests of your religion. That's good. You can sleep soundly at night. All right, so that's the story. The danger to modern journalists, of course, is that when there is no difference between press and combatants, then the press are no longer safe. So this is something that the press should be very, very careful about. But they haven't been careful about it. There was one, I just remembered it now. There was one press employee who sent photos of a bombing that Israel had done. I think it was Hezbollah in Lebanon or something. But what he'd done is he'd added smoke to various other buildings to make it look like a carpet bombing attack instead of a focused bombing attack. And that was published in, well, probably the New York Times, but I'm not sure. And then a few people noticed that it was really bad photoshopping. He was using the clone, that little clone stamp. So you could see these little circles where he'd stamped the smoke. And it was amusing in its way. But the West didn't learn from that. And that was years and years ago. I'm just dragging this up from the very depths of my memory. It might have been 20 years ago. And I'm surprised I remember that long, actually. Anyway, they're just not learning. And they're taking this stuff like raw meat just being handed to them on the end of a fork. And they just swallow it. They don't learn the lessons. They just stand there going, yeah, more. Give me more of that raw meat. It's thoroughly dangerous. Okay, well, yeah, that's what I have to say about the Hamas journalist. Till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.